Good morning. Hello. Hello, hello. Wonderful to see you. Let's see here. Ooh, fuzzy buzzy. Let's see. Good morning, Imogen and Luke. Now I am dark. There are less fuzz buzzes. Yes, good morning. Wonderful to see you all. Hello. I hope you're ready for a adventure into a big idea. Good morning, Clem and Gilly. Hello. Very good to see you. Let's see, we're coming in. We're coming in. Good morning. How is everybody today? Hopefully you've got some sunshine. I've got plenty of sunshine here. Good morning, Panda. I'm very well indeed. Yes, yes. Let's see. Good morning. Same. Yeah, you good too. Awesome. All right. So we'll give it just another minute or so for more people to come in, but then we'll get started. So this morning is a big idea rather than a philosopher. So today we're looking at ascetics. Good morning, Brea. Wonderful to see you. It was sunny yesterday, wasn't it, Hazel? Yeah. Oh, or Clement Gilly. It was very, very sunny yesterday, which was cool. And the background is nice, isn't it? I'm over China today. Not really linked to, I haven't really got much from China, but it's just a beautiful scene to be sitting in front of. Oh, yeah. All right. I tell you what, let's share up and let's get going, I suppose. Yay. All right. So today is all about ascetics or ascetics, depending on how you say it, or asceticism in general, which is the practice of being an ascetic. Ooh. Oh, that's all right, Brea. That's no problem at all if you have to jump out early. It'll be recorded so you can watch the ending back if you need to. That's all right. So our big idea today is going to span a lot of different religions and parts of the world, although there is maybe a bit of a focus on Christianity for some of our examples. Yeah, good question. Clement Gilly asked, what is an ascetic? Okay, so asceticism is causing yourself suffering in some way for some religious reason. So it's linked to religion. Although at the end, I argue that non-religious people can be ascetic too. I'll give some examples of that. So when we think of an ascetic, we think of someone who is usually living in a very unorthodox way, so an unusual way, usually, and somebody who lives quite a harsh life, at least in some aspects. Being an ascetic means taking away some of the pleasures in life intentionally, either out of respect for God or gods or spirit or whatever. What we're going to look at today, we're going to have a look at ascetics for wisdom. So ascetics who are aiming to be wise. We've got ascetics for escape. So ascetics who are trying to escape from something. We have ascetics for redemption. So trying to get forgiveness. Ascetics for relics, which I just kind of like the way that sounds, to be honest. Doesn't really make much sense, but ascetics for relics, that is going to be all about a certain type of ascetic from Christianity. Then we're going to look at ascetics for love and for duty and some ideas of everyday ascetics. And we're going to finish up with the opposite of ascetics or asceticism, which is hedonism, being a hedonist. So just to give a little bit of a counter argument, we're going to have a quick look at that at the end. Okay, so let's jump straight into ascetics for wisdom. Here we go. Ooh. Now, this is a representation of probably one of the most famous ascetics, I suppose. This here is a little statue of the Buddha, Siddhartha Gautama, the founder of Buddhism. Now, I don't know if it's been in one of these webinars, but I know I've gone through the story of the Buddha before in some capacity. But if you don't know the lowdown, the Buddha began life as a prince in north of India or the south of Nepal, depending on how you look at it. There he lived this wonderful life of luxury, of pleasure all the time. He was what we would call a hedonist, someone who cares most about feeling good. Sounds quite fun. So he's a hedonist. He grows up in this palace. His mum and dad, or well, his dad and his auntie, his mum dies tragically when he's young, but his dad and his auntie, they bring him up, and he just has everything he wants. You know, food whenever he wants it, drink whenever he wants it. He's surrounded by musicians and dancing girls the whole time. But then he gets bored of this life and he thinks, well, maybe there's something more to it. And he escapes from his palace. He rides away in the middle of the night after talking to an ascetic monk. Ooh, everything's wobbled. Now, this monk was quite common in India at that time. We're talking about 2,500 years ago. We're talking most people being Hindus around the place. And this Hindu ascetic suggested to the Buddha that if he really wanted to find a meaning in life, if he wanted to understand the world around him, if he wanted wisdom, then he would become an ascetic and he would hurt himself. And so that's what the Buddha did. For 7 years, the Buddha didn't really eat very much. We're talking, a few grains of rice a day. He didn't wear any clothes, so he got burnt by the hot sun and frozen by the cold winds. He made sure he didn't sleep in a bed or anywhere comfortable. So instead, he just slept on the ground, surrounded by tigers and spiders and whatever else you find in India. Cobras, I don't know. If he ever felt too good, he would hurt himself some more, maybe kick a rock. I don't know. Give yourself a slap round the face. And as you can see from our statue here, after 7 years of this, quite a long time, he's nearly dead. Ugh. So this asceticism helped the Buddha to become wiser. And to be honest, it's a bit of a strange example because the thing that he chose, that the wisdom that he gained from this, is that it's a really bad idea to hurt yourself for 7 years. You don't really become any wiser at all. In fact, you need to find the middle way. He'd lived a life of luxury and hedonism. He'd lived the life of complete asceticism, self-pain and self-denial. And he decided that actually you want to be somewhere in the middle of that, because on the luxury side, you just get fat and greedy and lazy and you're not a nice person. You don't really understand anything. But on the ascetic side, you end up hurting yourself so much that you can't really focus on the wisdom that you gain. So somewhere in the middle way is what the Buddha taught. But that doesn't mean that Buddhism isn't still ascetic. Most Buddhists are ascetic in some way. They withhold pleasure for themselves, especially if it could be a dangerous pleasure. So Buddhists, they don't smoke cigarettes. They don't drink any alcohol or take any drugs or drink any caffeine, because that is a drug too. And you might say, well, that's not really causing yourself suffering, but it is harder than maybe doing some of those things. I mean, people do some of those things because they're enjoyable. So most Buddhists would say, no, we're not going to do that because we want to be wise. We want the middle path. And if you start drinking wine every day or taking drugs every day, then you're not going to be able to focus on anything. And therefore, it's a bad idea. So they are still partly ascetic, although they don't starve themselves in the same way that the Buddha did. Thankfully, because this statue is a bit creepy. So let's stick in India for a bit, and let's look at different reasons why people might be ascetic. Now, one of these pictures we've talked about before, a long time ago in one of the early Big Ideas webinars. But lots of ascetics are Hindu. So India, big country, lots of Hindus living there, of course. And by no means all of those Hindus, but some of them can become ascetics. They will become things called sadhus. This guy here standing on one leg is an Agori. And there's hundreds of different types of ascetic. The wonderful thing about Hinduism, and also the slightly confusing thing about Hinduism, is that there's no book, there's no rules, there's no agreement on pretty much anything. Hindus don't agree on the same gods, let alone the same way to live your life. But we do see similarities amongst lots of different types of ascetics in India. The sadhus are probably the most famous. These are people who give up life, or normal life, I should say, and they go wandering around India, just strolling about. No clothes, no homes, no soft beds, no feasts. They live in a kind of wild way. Sometimes, how do you spell sadhu? Just like you just did. No, I think actually the D and the H are the other way around. Let me write it up here if I can find my pen in the skinny darkness. Oh, that's not a pen. So I believe it's like that. Sadhu. Yeah. So our sadhus, they leave their families, they leave their loved ones, and they might live in small groups, little sort of packs, gangs. I don't know what the proper name would be. Or they can be completely alone and just literally wander around naked. They're pretty much always exclusively men. Most sadhus, if you want to join a group of sadhus, you have to prove yourself through some very difficult means. So we can see in this picture down here, we've got one sadhu who sort of stood on this bed of nails. If you've ever sort of seen those, I don't know, sometimes in cartoons, they might have a Hindu person lying on a bed of nails being all like, ooh. They don't eat very much. In some groups of sadhus, to even become a sadhu, to even get into the group, you have to stand up for 7 years without sitting down. And that's what this guy here is doing. He's kind of propped up in this prop, yeah, so that he doesn't sit down. So you spend 7 years stood up, which is really, really difficult because standing up is hard to do. Yeah, you just got to lean on your little thing. Can't sit down, can't lie down to sleep, of course. So you have to sleep standing up. But if you manage it, if you get through 7 years of that, and you might start quite young doing this because 7 years is a long time of people's lives. But when you do it, as a reward, they take away your testicles. Yeah. And then you're completely free. You can sit down, but you can't reproduce, of course. That's against the sadhu rule. That's not very ascetic, is it? So sadhus, some of them might have been through quite extreme, long lengths of pain and discomfort before becoming a wandering sadhu to sort of... and they do have a function. They're not just doing this for no reason. They're doing it to escape from the myths and the silly ways that normal people live their lives. If you've stood up for 7 years, you get a different view of the world, I reckon, from normal people. So you can escape from a life of boredom or normality by being an ascetic. The Agoris, who is this guy here standing on his one leg, they maybe even take that further. They're a small group of ascetics who spend their lives in crematoria, so places where the dead are stored or burnt. In Hinduism, cremation is the main form of dealing with dead bodies. So these people will live in the charnel houses, surrounded by bones and the ash of humans. They will drink out of human skulls. They will wipe the ashes of the dead around them, and they will mix it with their food. And they will spend a lot of time meditating, literally on dead bodies. Some have even been known to eat dead bodies or parts of dead bodies. But the idea is to build up a complete escape, a total escape, not an escape from somewhere physical. They're not like escaping from prison, but they're escaping from fear. It is a bit ew, isn't it, Clement? Yeah, it's gross. Yeah, but they do it because they escape from fear of death. No longer, after you've done that for 10 years or whatever, drinking all your drinks out of a human skull and nibbling on corpses, no. Eventually, you're going to be completely unafraid of death. Death is going to be nothing to you anymore because you've lived among it. You've existed with it for so long that you aren't afraid of your own death. And as soon as you're not afraid of your own death in Hinduism, that's one of the first barriers to true escape from this world and to true enlightenment too. So there is method in the madness, even though I personally would not like to live in a crematorium. So these are very modern examples. Obviously, we have photographs here. The photograph I started with today was of a sadhu too. So these are ascetics who are very much around today. It's quite popular in India. I mean, not like crazy popular. It's not like, hey, what should we do? Should we play Xbox or become a sadhu? It's not quite that popular. But there are lots of people that do it. If you go to India, chances are you'll see a sadhu or two wandering around. They have an important community aspect too, because sadhus are the people within an area who are there to fight demons. So if there are demons or witches or monsters or evil spirits or evil spirit witch monsters, then the sadhus will fight them for you, often with sticks or stones or being incredibly intimidating. I wouldn't fight a sadhu. It's just too frightening. Even if I was a demon. Yeah. So, asceticism can be a form of escape from this life. Now, Hindus and Buddhists, they both have a similar belief that when we die, we become reincarnated. We come back as something else. Our ascetics, whether they're Buddhist or Hindu, they want to stop that. They want to stop coming back to life. They want to become so good at living that they can just disappear upon death. And that, of course, is a form of escape from either samsara or the cycle of life and death, or however you want to put it. All right, we'll leave our sadhus alone to meditate on corpses, and we're going to come to a bit of Christianity here. So asceticism is something that's very traditional in Christianity. We're going to have to look at some very old examples, but I thought we'd start with some modern examples here. This photograph is taken or was taken in Italy, and this shows flagellants who are flagellating themselves with tools called disciplines. Nah, sounds horrible, looks horrible. If we zoom in on these tools here, it's basically a whole loads of bits of quite sharp, nasty metal attached with metal chains to a handle, and then you hit yourself with it. Ouch. And the whole point is that it's ouch. So in Christianity, since really medieval times, and here's a medieval interpretation of a flagellant, we can see there that he's got a spiky set of balls attached to what is a whip, and he's whipping his own back. Youch, youch, youch. But the reason they're doing this is for redemption, for the saving of their own souls. Because they believe, like lots of Christians have always believed, that because Christ, Jesus Christ, went through such a lot of suffering when he died, why encourage hitting yourself? Yeah, okay, so yeah, this is the reason for it. So Christ hurt himself. He didn't have to die on the cross because he is magic and God. So he went through all that suffering. He was tortured, he was beaten, he had to drag his cross up to a hill, then he was nailed to the thing, and then he died after being stabbed by a spear. I mean, it's quite extreme violence, isn't it? So in some Christians' minds, and certainly not all, but they would say, well, because Christ went through pain for us, maybe we can go through pain to show that we are Christ-like, we are like Jesus, and to show God that we are sorry for our sins. So where this really started to become popular for the first time in history, and sort of large groups of flagellants, people who whip themselves would come around, was during times of plague in the medieval times. So a plague breaks out, people start to die, some people maybe go to the local doctor, which wasn't really much of a doctor, to find some kind of cure. Some people might have gone to the wise old women of the village, who might have done something with herbs and bits of bat wing. Hang on, maybe that's not real. I feel like it is. Or you could blame yourself. You could say, well, why are we all dying of this horrible plague? It's because God hates us. Well, why does God hate us? It's because maybe it's because we mix the recycling with the non-recyclable goods. Maybe it's just that we're bad people, we're not good enough. So if you've decided you're not good enough, now Brea says you can hit yourself to death instead. Now they're not going to hit themselves to death. They're not trying to kill themselves. That's important to point out. But by hurting themselves and showing openly that they are hurting themselves, that shows that they are sorry for what they have done, and they might not even be totally clear on what the problem is. You're a medieval monk, everyone's dying around you of the plague. You might just start thinking, okay, well, it probably is my fault. So if I beat myself up a bit to show that I'm sorry to God, then maybe God will forgive me, forgive my community, and the plague will go away. It's tricky though, because these images here of flagellants, they're not really Brea says it sounds like it feeds into today's mental ill health. I suppose there would have been, wouldn't there, throughout history, there would have been people with the same mental health issues as we have, and so there may be all kinds of different underlying reasons why flagellants flagellate themselves. But these ones, they do look a bit like the KKK. That's true. They're not dressed up as the KKK. The KKK were a group of Christians, so they sort of took on this kind of Catholic hood, which is ironic because the KKK are Protestants and they hate Catholics, but they sort of took on that old school Christian look to disguise their forms. Now, the reason the flagellants in this picture are in these costumes is because they want to show God that they are hurting themselves, but they don't want to upset the people in the community by having to see all the cuts and bruises and blood. So as you'll see, they're whipping themselves over their robes, just to be more child friendly. I guess that's part of it. But each of these people here who is whipping themselves with these disciplines, these metal things, they'll have their own personal reasons. Maybe they were criminals once and they did time in prison. Maybe, I don't know, they cheated on their girlfriends, or they told a lie, or they just did something that they feel really bad about. It's not something that's widely supported by the Catholic Church. In fact, at certain times in history, the Catholic Church has completely banned this. Hasn't stopped people doing it, but the Pope says you don't need to hit yourself, guys. Okay, let's maybe stop that now. But there's always going to be a small percentage of people who see the logic. Jesus suffered, we will suffer to show that we love Jesus and that we are sorry for our sins. There you are. Brea says, doesn't the blood come through the white? I don't know. Maybe if we had a back view of this photo, maybe I don't know. Yeah. It's not just whipping though. At Easter time in places, this photo is taken in Italy here. So in places like Italy and Spain, so really Catholic European countries in particular, they make these huge sort of Easter, what would they even be called? They're like massive stage sets almost. They're these huge objects, really heavy, that weigh several tons, and they're covered in decoration and maybe a statue of Jesus, and the cross is hanging up above the top. And then people in the community who feel that they have done wrong, so again, criminals or just people who feel guilty about stuff, they take the job of carrying this thing. So maybe 30, 40, 50 people will hold this incredibly heavy, intentionally heavy thing, and then they'll stagger through the streets with it to show their love of God and to say, sorry, I did wrong this year, but I'm helping to carry this ridiculously heavy thing, so hopefully God will forgive me for what I did. That's the idea. So this is, again, of course, because it is asceticism, this is an example of people who, they go through suffering for their religion. They're not told to do it. They're not forced to do it. It's a personal choice, and one that I personally don't like the idea of. But hey, maybe if there was a plague, I might. I don't know. I haven't been in that situation. All right, let's go for our ascetics for relics here. If we're going back in time a little bit, even before the medieval period, so before the birth of flagellation, we would find ascetics, Christian ascetics, early Christian ascetics. So we're talking in like 100, 200 AD, that kind of thing. Oh, that's a good point. Danielle says there's a plague right now. Sort of, yeah, maybe the plague right now. I mean, well, maybe now's a good time to talk about that. In a way, the plague has led to asceticism, isn't it? Maybe not religious asceticism, but what is lockdown? Lockdown is an ascetic practice. We withhold things from ourselves, our pleasures. We cause ourselves a certain amount of mental and maybe even physical pain by, being stuck inside. And we do it for a higher purpose. So most people in lockdown aren't really afraid of COVID, especially younger people. They're not afraid it's going to kill them. They're not afraid, particularly, that it's going to make them ill. If they were told, the worst thing that's going to happen if you get COVID is you're going to cough a bit, then most people would probably not do a lockdown. But of course, we do a lockdown because we know that there are other people in society, something bigger than us, something maybe that's not even directly connected to us. So the elderly people in society who would suffer if we didn't suffer a little bit. So we take that on, don't we? Even if it's not a religious thing, we say, okay, we will go through the ascetics. We will withdraw from life for a little bit in order to save something bigger than ourselves. And that's essentially what these Christians and Hindus and Buddhists are doing. They're causing themselves what they see as a rather minimal amount of pain in order to make the world a better place. So to make God happy, to make God stronger, to leave the web of reincarnation. That's what they're doing. So you could give yourself a pat on the back and call yourself an ascetic if you've been doing lockdown, maybe. Or you could argue doesn't really count because we were forced to do it. I don't know. Don't know what you guys think about that one. But maybe we do it because we want to and because we are moral people, or maybe we do it just because the government told us that if we didn't, we'd be told off. And asceticism doesn't really work like that. You can't be a religious ascetic and forced to do it. It just doesn't count. You do it because you want to find the answers, or you want the, I don't know, the forgiveness or the freedom or whatever. Yeah. So yeah, that's so Brea says we weren't forced to do it, and I think I agree with you, Brea. Although there were laws or are laws, I think if people really, really didn't want to do it, they just wouldn't, would they? Yeah, they would just carry on as normal, and the police couldn't stop everyone. Yeah, Brea says it this way: if everyone chose not to do lockdown, no one could stop. That's a really good point. So we could argue that actually we do. We've made a moral choice. Based on something higher than ourselves, not quite religion, but there are hints there, and we've chosen to cause ourselves a little bit of pain for quite a long time, but it is definitely discomfort. It's definitely the opposite of a true hedonist would ignore lockdown. They would just be out, I don't know, partying every night, possibly on their own, but because everyone else would be in lockdown. But a true hedonist just wouldn't care. They would only consider themselves. They wouldn't think about, the old woman living down the road who they could spread COVID to. They would just, they'd be selfish about it. I suppose, most people in Britain or most people in the world under lockdown have not been that way, have they? And they've chosen not to be that way. So let's go back to the pre-medieval, early Christian history, when there were people right from day one, pretty much, followers of Jesus, even before Christianity became a huge thing, there were people who wanted to worship God in a way that made them uncomfortable, stopped them from going around things that they love or like, or maybe temptations that aren't so good for them. And where Jesus lived, in what is now modern day Israel, they've got a very good landscape for that. There's a lot of desert. And in fact, neighboring countries, go down into Egypt, you find desert. Over to Jordan or Syria, you find desert. And the desert is a really good place to be an ascetic. In fact, one of the earliest examples of an ascetic, I suppose, even before Christianity, was John the Baptist, who was Jesus's cousin. So Jesus' cousin was 6 months old, 6 months older than him. Both he and Jesus came from a nice religious family. But John, whereas Jesus, well, it's a bit mysterious what Jesus did in his teenage years. We don't really know. But we know what John did. John went out into the desert and he made it so that it was as comfortable as possible. He would only wear clothes made out of camel hair. Now, I don't know if you've ever stroked a camel. Maybe you have. But camel hair is very rough, very scratchy. And if that's what you're wearing, imagine you're wearing a shirt made out of that and some pants made out of that. Everything's itches all the time. It's not comfortable, like using, I don't know, some soft kind of fur or cotton or something as we would today. So he dressed uncomfortably. He didn't cut his hair or shave his face, and so he ended up all like scraggly. We'll come to the man in the egg cup in a second. And he starved himself. He would only eat locusts, so those insects, if he found one, he'd gobble it up. Or if he found wild honey, he would eat that. But of course, he'd have to share that or challenge bees for that. So he'd probably get stung quite a lot. He didn't really drink very much, which is important in the desert, of course. And so it is good protein. It's true. It's not the most unhealthy thing to eat, but I think it's the amount that he ate, which was the real problem, i.e. not much. So John the Baptist, during that time, he experienced God. He spoke to God, and God told him that Jesus was coming and that Jesus was special. And John the Baptist ends up baptizing Jesus in the River Jordan to show his connection with God. And then as soon as he does that, Jesus, who is like the star of the show, of course, of Christianity, when he finds out, the very moment he finds out that he is God, because his dad talks to him and says, hey, you're God, essentially, he doesn't start dancing around and partying. He doesn't become hedonistic. The first thing Jesus does is he goes into the desert. He stays there for 40 days and 40 nights, doesn't eat any food, doesn't drink any water, doesn't get any shelter from the sun in the day or the freezing cold nights. He has to battle with the devil and temptations, either literally, if you take it literally, or he's out there hallucinating and experiencing terrible spiritual battles. But he's an ascetic for 40 days and 40 nights until he comes back to the real world. So it's a good example. If Jesus did it, if John the Baptist did it, then why wouldn't we do it? Yeah. Obviously, it was important to Jesus. So why don't we go out into the desert and live an uncomfortable life? And that brings us to Saint Simeon the Stylite, or just Simeon the Stylite. Now, Saint Simeon, he was one of these early Christian fathers. He was big into religion. He was big into Jesus, and he wanted to experience some of that suffering that Jesus experienced. Does John the Baptist baptize baby Jesus? Oh, no. So that's a good question. The question here is, does John the Baptist baptize baby Jesus when he's 6 months old? No. So they're both, 18, 19, something like that, when the baptism happens. Because Jesus kind of disappears in the Bible. We don't really know what he did as a young man, but he comes back as like a late teenager, and that's when they do the baptism thing. Yeah, somewhere around there. Now, Saint Simeon, there were lots of people in the desert. You find a crack in the floor, there'll be a holy man in there waving, hello. You find maybe a patch of boulders. You'll find under one of them there's a holy man living. All right. It's pretty hard. I mean, the desert's a big empty place, but when there's a holy man hiding in every hole and every crack, and just like the hermit in Life of Brian. Yes, if you've seen that Life of Brian film, which some of you shouldn't have yet, but yeah, just like that. Yeah, living in a hole in the desert, and it was very common that people would do that. Saint Simeon, he wanted to stand apart. He wanted to do his asceticism in a way that not everyone else is doing. He doesn't want to sit in a bush. That's boring. That's been done. So he builds himself a pillar, which in this medieval drawing looks a little bit like an egg cup. I hadn't really noticed that, but you're right. Panda's seen it too. Okay, there you are. So yeah, think the holy men preaching nonsense in the desert, but not necessarily nonsense, depending on what they're preaching, I guess. The different versions of Judaism and Christianity and their own new religions, and I've seen the holy chicken. The chicken told me that we must all wear our shoes on our heads. That kind of thing. Yeah. Saint Simeon, he says, I'm going to stand out from the crowd. So he builds this pillar and he gets on top of it. And he stays there on top of the pillar for 32 years. Just hanging out on a pillar, just standing there, sitting there on the pillar for 32 years. People brought him food, of course. They brought him water every now and again. They would come to him for wise words. Oh, Saint Simeon, you are so holy on your pillar. Tell me, can you heal my cow? And Saint Simeon would look down at the sick cow. He would stroke his long silver beard, probably. I don't know what color his beard was. And he would do some praying. He would say some holy words. Maybe, I don't know, tell a joke. I don't know what he did. And then miraculously, the cow was healed. And they'd all go, hooray for Saint Simeon. How did he not get bored? I imagine he got very bored. But boredom, you see, boredom is a sign of evil, of being a bad person. Only those people who are naughty could really get bored, because if you're a good person, you get over boredom through prayer. You pray to God. And so that's what Saint Simeon does for most of his time. He sits on a holy pillar. And now, how does he not fall down? So this is like, I don't think this is Saint Simeon's, this one that I found here, but this is a later stylite pillar. So it's more like a tower, I guess, here. There would be maybe a ladder going up the outside, or maybe even a ladder going up in the inside. And then you'd sort of sit at the top. So you would have room to lie down, maybe move around. Some of the pillars were much less solid than that. St. Simeon's original pillar was probably just an actual pole in the ground with maybe a small sitting platform on top, a bit like what we see here. So yeah, he wouldn't fall down because, well, I suppose you wouldn't want to. It would hurt a lot. You'd probably die if you fell off one of these things, I guess. So St. Simeon becomes a celebrity. Everyone loves St. Simeon because he can heal sick animals. He can heal sick people. He says very wise things from up there. How are you doing, St. Simeon? Are you fine today? Got any advice for me? And St. Simeon might say, oh yes, today you must pray 7 times. 7 times you must pray. And then you will have a nice, I don't know, day. I'm not sure what Saint Simeon said. Yeah, day. He just had a nice day, prayer. So so the people loved him. They would, oh, a nice chicken sandwich. Maybe if you went to Saint Simeon, he would sort it with God that you got a nice chicken sandwich. Oh, I get your joke now. Sorry, sorry, Panda. It's holy. Yeah, a holy pillar. I get you. So Saint Simeon's up his pillar for 32 years. And the reason I've called this Ascetics for Relics is because he was such a celebrity that loads of other people started copying him. To be a stylite was a bit of a fad. People all over the desert raising up their own pillars and sitting on top of them. It spread all the way into Northern Europe. There were people in Germany who were building pillars and sitting on top of them. But when St. Simeon died, which he did eventually, as you'd expect, the people were sad because they'd lost their saint, but they're also really happy. People, would have watched St. Simeon for a while. People from the nearby town or villages and stuff, they'd have watched him come out to see how he was. They'd have noticed that he was getting ill, getting weaker up there on the pillar. You know, he's been up there for a few decades now. They noticed that he was, you know, an old man. He probably didn't have long left. And they circled like vultures. And the day that he did die, the people swarmed around. They ripped him to pieces. Some took bits of his clothing. Some took bits of his hair or beard. Some opened him up and took sort of captured bits of his blood. Some people took his fingers, his toes, his legs, his skull. They tore him into bits, which doesn't seem very respectful, because, you know, this is the guy who fixed the cows and stuff. Yeah, people are gross. But they did it for a reason, because he was so holy. Imagine how powerful the finger bone of a holy man like Saint Simeon must be. Oh, if you had that in your house, or maybe tied around your neck, that's going to be a very, very strong charm against witchcraft or demons or the devil. So yeah, they loved him, but they also loved having bits of him. There you are. Imagine if you'd got the same disease he died of. I think he just died of old age. But being Stylite, it stuck around, you know, for a while, 100 years, 200 years, you know, there were still Stylites around, but it did kind of come out of fashion after a while. In Northern Europe, they had a problem. You know, these Stylites in places like Germany, Poland, places like that, didn't really work out there. In the desert, you can be a Stylite because, well, it's kind of warm all the time. If you're a Stylite in January in northern Germany, well, people ended up dying because it would be a very cold night and you come out in the morning and your local Stylite would be frozen solid to the pillar, just completely dead and blue. So yeah, didn't really work. You couldn't be a Stylite for 32 years in Germany. So that died out. They also had a problem with thunderstorms, as you can imagine. In the desert, you've got maybe 10, 15 people living on top of poles. You know, that's the highest point. So if there's a thunderstorm, you'd wake up the next day and you'd have 3 roasted Stylites, which is great if you want to collect a relic, but maybe not great if you want to be a Stylite. Lightning plus Stylite equals dead Stylite. Basic mathematical equation now. And Fiona says he was definitely holy after they ripped into him. Very good. Holy. Very holy. Now, I said Stylites have kind of gone out of fashion. It's not entirely true. There are Stylites out there. This guy here, who looks very, very funky. Oh yeah, this is a monk. I believe he's in Greece, although I can't remember exactly where he is. I think it's Greece he lives in. But this guy, he was, what should we call him? He was a criminal. He was a bad guy. Yeah, when he was younger, he went around, he drank lots, he committed crime. He ended up in prison. Brea's pointing out he's not on a tower. Well, he kind of is. So about 20 years ago, once he got out of prison, he became a monk, and he decided that he didn't want to spend his life causing crime and being mean. He wanted to spend his life alone and as close to God as possible. Now, luckily, in his local area, there's this great big natural pillar. Now, to get up it, there's an incredibly rickety ladder. Apparently, it takes more than 20 minutes to climb up or down that ladder. And I think he does come down sometimes because people come to the bottom of the pillar to pray, and he'll come and pray with them. But he spends most of his time, you know, at the top of that huge climb in this weird little, it's kind of like a little house. Now, this was used for the same purpose and has been used for the same purpose for hundreds of years, but not recently. You know, in the last few hundred years, no one's been at the top of the pillar. This guy, he looked at it, he said, well, I'll just bring back that tradition. I'll go and live up there. So he's been up there for 20 years. When he went up at first, he didn't have a bed or anything, so he slept in a fridge. I don't know how you sleep in a fridge, and I don't know if the fridge is on. I couldn't find whether he had the fridge plugged in and was like sleeping in the fridge because it was so cold, or whether he was just, you know, a fridge was the closest thing to a bed that he had. But he slept in a fridge for a while. He now does have a mattress, which is nice. But the vast majority of his life is spent completely alone. You know, he does come down every now and again, and he will let people up to visit him sometimes. But other than that, it's just him and the sky, him and God. That's it. His name is Maxim Quatraradze. Quatraradze. Oh, he's in Georgia, not in Greece. So he's in Georgia. Now, the photographer who took these photos was obviously allowed up to see Maxim, but not before he had prayed for 7 hours straight for 4 days in a row. So the photographer, who's not a Christian, just was interested in this guy, he has to pray for 7 hours every day for 4 days. Then he's allowed to spend the 20-odd minutes climbing up the rickety ladder to the top. And then he was allowed to take photos and interview Maxim here. I just wish he'd asked him more questions about the fridge, because this journalist, he talks about the fridge, but he doesn't explain it in the detail that I would like. I want to see Maxim in a fridge, and I want to understand how it works. Maybe one day I will go, I will visit him, and I will ask him about the fridge. So that's a modern stylite. I'm hopeful that when Maxim dies, he is not shredded into bits and people steal his fingers. But I don't know. I don't know. Just good luck, Maxim. Just imagine he's sat up there right now. Sure, just chilling in a fridge. Now, sometimes people are ascetics, not because they want anything, but just because they love. They love. And here we have a picture of someone in the Philippines taking part in crucifixion. There you are. So this guy has been nailed to a cross. We could probably understand why. This happens every Easter, chilling in a fridge. Every Easter in the Philippines, a small amount of people will volunteer to be crucified in the same way as Jesus. So this guy here, you can see he's just having the nails put in, and you've got the blood stains, and it's all a bit, nah. Now, they don't die. That's a good point. I should have said that first. He's not killing himself, but it is, for all intents and purposes, a real crucifixion. He's going to hang there for about 20 minutes, held up by the nails in his hands and his wrists, and his ankles, sorry. Yeah. He probably would have whipped himself first, but the whole point is they go through like a whole play, so they act out the Easter story, and then they are taken to the place, they are nailed to the cross is put up. You know, there's doctors around and stuff to make sure they don't die. And yeah, after 20 minutes or so, they are let down, and they're supposed to have an understanding of God. Now, they're not necessarily doing this in this case because they're sorry for something, although they may be. They want to do it because they love God, and they want to understand what God's pain was like. So I can imagine being crucified, and I imagine it's pretty horrible. Yeah. I mean, my imagination is pretty good. But of course, I don't actually know exactly what it feels like. So I can't actually know exactly what Jesus was experiencing when he was crucified. How would you remedy that? Well, the closest thing you can do is crucify yourself temporarily, feel the pain, feel the burn, and then maybe you understand what Jesus went through. And you do it out of love. You love Jesus, you want to sympathize with him, you want to understand him, and therefore you cause yourself pain. Now, we'll leave our crucified man there for a minute. Now, by far the most common form of asceticism within Christianity would be being a monk or a nun. Spending your time, giving up your entire life. And that's where this whole webinar came from, because a month ago, when we did the other topic, I can't even remember what the topic was now, we kind of ended up on monks and nuns, and it kind of spun into this one. So sacrifice, thank you, Bray. We're looking at sacrifice and sacrificing your life or your comfort, and that's what asceticism is. So this is the true crossover here. If you become a monk or a nun in Christianity, but also within other religions too, you know, some religions don't have monks or nuns, like Islam does not have any monks or nuns. But if in Christianity or Judaism, things like that, if you become a monk or a nun, or like the Vestal Virgins, they're a good example of this too, then you have to give up normal life. You spend your days not in, it's not, you're not hurting yourself, you're not whipping yourself, you're not starving yourself or anything like that. But you usually, depending on exactly what type of monk or nun you are, you will take oaths. You will take, you will deny yourself things. You'll take vows. We'll come to the walling up in a second. So your standard sort of being a monk or nun, you might well take, well, you will definitely take a vow of poverty. You will say, I will not own things or money. You will take a vow of obedience to say that you will give up your free will, or at least part of it, and you will do what you are told by the leader of the monks or the nuns. So you give up your own freedom. You will often take a vow of chastity, which means that you'll have no romantic or sexual relationships. And you live your life in a very different way to your average Joe Blogs on the street. Again, no one forces you to do it. It's a choice, but it's a choice that affects your entire life. You can't, there's no such thing as like a weekday nun. You can't be a nun for a week and then have the weekend off where you go around dancing with the devil. That's not really a thing, is it? So once you sign up, and for as long as you want to be a nun or a monk, then you're going to live that ascetic lifestyle. Now, some take it even further, and we do know that in the past, certain monks and nuns have decided to go through more pain. The standard existence for a monk or nun is to live in a cell. Yeah, we call prison cells, don't we? And they're not far off. Small rooms with a bed, maybe a bedside table, maybe, I don't know, a copy of the Bible or something, and your habit that you wear, your clothes. Not particularly comfortable. And it's not supposed to be comfortable. You're not supposed to laze around in bed as a monk or nun. You go to bed to sleep, and then you wake up and you get on with the serious business of prayer and helping others. But some monks and nuns, they took it even further, or they take it even further, and they might get themselves confined into very small spaces. So traditionally, some, and it's quite rare, but it's called annulment. Sometimes monks or nuns will have themselves walled up into a very small space. So maybe like, a cupboard, and then they'll be bricked up with just a hole so that people can, poke through the odd bit of food and water. And then you'll just stay there for 10 years. Can't really move around, not very much. You shuffle, I guess. You're reliant on other people coming to, bring you food and water and stuff. There's no way out. Sounds like terrible thing to me to be stuck in a wall. But if it's a choice, how do they go to the toilet? I assume they go to the toilet in the hole, and maybe they can poke it out through the gap. I just 10 years, Brea. 10 years stuck in a wall. I don't know what you do. I mean, what do you think about it for 10 years? I mean, you're supposed to think about prayer and Jesus, but 10 years is an awfully long time to be stuck in a wall. I guess, though, I mean, at any time, they could say, let me out, I'm bored. So 10 years is pretty good going, I suppose. But there you are. I hadn't thought of the toilet question, Brea. It's made me quite disturbed now. So being a monk or nun is something that is that is certainly a type of asceticism, and probably the most common type of asceticism that we see in modern times. In Britain, there are lots of monks and nuns. There aren't, as far as I know, any stylites. There are probably some people who self-flagellate, who whip themselves, but it's not something that I'm familiar with really on a day-to-day basis. But I could go to a monastery and meet some people living ascetic lifestyles today if I wanted to, as monks and nuns. So are we ever ascetics? Now I put some examples here to, and it's not true asceticism, some of these, because to be truly ascetic, it has to have some kind of religious connotation. But I thought, where in society today would we find asceticism? Probably the most common in Britain is still Lent, which is part of Christianity, of course, leading up to Easter, where often people will give up things. So they will, and this sort of ties in with our sacrifice idea as well. I think we mentioned it last time in sacrifice. But if you give up alcohol or chocolate or cake or, I don't know, eating badgers for Lent, then that is a small type of asceticism that everyone can do. Yeah, if you are religious and want to do it, of course. So yeah, a Christian who decides not to drink wine during Lent, that is a basic form of asceticism. They're giving something up. They are withdrawing from a pleasure on purpose with a religious aim for that. But the other two things I've got here, we've got Movember, which is not a religious thing at all, but every November, people, usually men, for obvious reasons, they grow their moustaches and they sort of take sponsorship money and they give it to the charity Movember, who then give that money to people who are, I don't know, ill or starving, or I don't know where the money goes specifically. But that's a weird sort of ascetic example. For most men who don't already have, I mean, I don't mind having a mustache because I've got one, but if you know, when you first grow a mustache, it's kind of itchy and scratchy and not very nice and uncomfortable, and you might think you look silly. So it's a little bit of discomfort to grow a mustache for a month, but there is a higher cause. It's maybe not religious, but it's for charity. It's to give people money. So you, the person, the individual, goes through a little bit of discomfort and pain, maybe, depending on how you look at pain. And they're doing it for a bigger reason. Dry January is another one. That's quite a modern thing, isn't it? Let's not drink alcohol for January because it's healthy and good. It's got nothing to do with religion, but it is asceticism in a way. It's let's give up something that we like for a higher cause. And that might be our own health or the health of the community or our wallets or whatever. Yeah. So people can be ascetic. You might think of things in your life that are ascetic. Maybe you're one of those people who you don't eat more than one sweet at a time. Yeah, there's some people like that, aren't there? There are people like me. I get a bag of sweets. I just eat all the sweets. I will eat sweets until there are no sweets left. If somebody came along and added more sweets to my sweet bag, I would just keep eating them. But some people, they can open up a bag of sweets, eat one or two, and then put them away. Because they know that it's better in the long run for them not to eat all the sweets. Fiona says, a bit like sponsored walks, runs, or cycles. Yeah, it's the same thing. Why do people pay us money to go on a sponsored run? Well, because essentially running isn't that great fun. Yeah, for some people it is. Well, for a lot of people it is fun. But for a lot of people who are doing it for sponsored, they're doing it for charity, aren't they? They're not doing it because, hey, I want to run. They're doing it because they want to help other people out. And it's a bit uncomfortable for them. Yeah. See, Brea likes to save chocolate so she doesn't eat it all at once. Well, some people are strange, Brea. What can I say? Some people crucify themselves. Some people are like you. I mean, people are weird. Blah. Now, Brea, there's a good question. Clem, Gilly, and Panda all do that. Brea's asking, what about working a really boring office job and then going on holiday? Now, that's a bit different because the core reason for doing an office job, even if it is boring, would be for your own benefit or for the benefit of your family. We do that for wages. Asceticism isn't something you can be paid for. You give up, and the reason that you do it is for God. So if you worked in an office for God, you were a volunteer, you went into the office every day and sent emails to, I don't know, people about Jesus, I don't know, then that might be asceticism, because you'd be going through suffering in order to do something religious. So that's why Movember and Dry January aren't truly ideas of asceticism, but it's, we can see maybe the glimmer of asceticism in our culture sometime when people give stuff up. Okay, now I did say if we had time at the end, we'd have a look at hedonism, the opposite of this, but we'll come to hedonism in the future. We've got some hedonist philosophers and religions to look at. So yeah, we'll tick that off our list at some other time. Fiona's mum tries to save the chocolate, but then you eat it. That's very good. All right, so hopefully we've heard some interesting stuff today and given you something to think about. Is it worth sacrificing stuff, giving stuff up, putting ourselves through pain for a higher cause? Is that something you would do, something you do, or something you think is ridiculous? It's up to you to decide, I guess. No, no, no. All right. I'll see you in a couple of weeks, guys. Thank you very much. Bye. Bye.